The English opening is a powerful and confusing opening that even you can use to beat your opponents and skyrocket your elo. You start with c4, and your opponent is already confused and has no idea what to do because literally no one plays this. The important thing about c4 is that you don't have to occupy the center immediately. Instead, you're controlling the important d5 square, because d5 is the key square black wants to use for their own central pawn structure, but d5 is basically English territory now. Most of the time black will play e5. We will look at other responses from black later. Next, let's talk about your bishop. You want to put him onto g2, so he controls this entire diagonal. And this bishop isn't necessarily trying to attack something immediately. Its real job is to control the long diagonal and become extremely powerful once the center starts opening up. Then you have this pawn. He wants to go to d3, giving you this very strong pawn structure. This also gives your c4 pawn extra support and makes it much harder for black to take control of the center with d5. This pawn structure is stronger than the English government. Now for the last piece, you want to put your knight onto c3, and you can already see the synergy. The c4 pawn, c3 knight, and g2 bishop all work together to control the important central squares. But there are still two pieces left to develop. They each have two positions they can go to. One is more aggressive, while the other is more passive. The aggressive option gives you more control and pressure, but your piece can also become a target. The passive option is safer and more flexible, which is why I'd recommend it if you're still learning the opening. Sometimes boring is good. Don't need to reinvent your life every day. Let's look at the bishop first. He can either go to g5 to pin the knight, or you can fianchetto him like the other bishop. At this point, the bishop has more career options than most people. Now for the knight, you can either develop him to f3 or push e5 and put him in this more defensive position. Now let's look at some of black's other responses. Some of your opponents will play d4, thinking they can play some kind of Scandinavian-style opening. But that's just bad. They take with the queen, and you can develop your knight while gaining a free tempo. And this is an important general chess rule. When your opponent brings their queen out too early, try to develop a piece while attacking that queen. You get development and gain time at the same time. Now you have two central pawns, while your opponent only has one, so you have a huge advantage in the center. You don't really need my help to play against these stupid opponents. Now some will push c5, which leads to the symmetrical variation, and you just develop your pieces like before. Black will in this variation play very similar moves, but you will always have an advantage because black is one tempo behind. In this variation, the most crucial moment is to break the center at the right point. You should do this mostly based on calculations, but there are two main things to look out for. First, you should have castled your king in safety because we don't want him to disappear. Next, you want to calculate if you win the break in the center, then if not, you just give a free advantage to your opponent and should probably delete chess. By the way, sometimes you'll encounter knight f6, but don't worry. Black just wants to stay a bit flexible, but actually has no idea and will play one of these moves next, which you can easily handle. We're at the last part you need to learn. After that, I'll show you a full game and explain how to play the middle game. When black plays e6, they're trying to conquer the center by playing d5 next. And that's the problem. If black gets d5 in for free, they can build a huge central pawn structure and make it much harder for you to fight for the center. You can't play the English the same way against this, so your plans have to change slightly. But trust me, you can still win a lot of games with this setup. So black plays e6, and you bring out the knight to put more pressure on the d5 square. They push, and you respond with d4. Now this is called the queen's gambit declined, and you have a simple game plan. When they take this pawn, you play e4, and you've now officially colonized the center. Now look at what you've achieved. Your two central pawns control a huge amount of space, while black has given up their central control. This is exactly why we were willing to change our entire setup against e6. In this variation, you never want to fianchetto the bishop, because his mission is to take this pawn back once your opponent has given you the center. Your knight should go here so you maintain your aggressive position, and by the way, whenever your opponent develops his knight here, you want to pin it. After that, you can castle and you're chilling. So let's go over everything one last time. Your pawn comes out, you normally fianchetto your bishop, then your knight goes here, and you push the pawn. From there, you can choose whether you want your knight and bishop on the aggressive or more passive squares. Then you castle. Against e6, you develop your knight first, then you play d4, and when they take your pawn, you conquer the center and take back the pawn. You develop your knight to f3, and when they bring out their knight, you pin it. Perfect. Now let's look at a game from the Champions Chess Tour, where the world #1 Magnus Carlsen played against French-Iranian grandmaster Alireza Firouzja and used the same principles we just learned. Magnus plays c4, and his opponent plays e5. He fianchettos the bishop while his opponent develops his pieces. He stabilizes his pawn structure with d3, and after his opponent castles, Magnus puts his knight on the aggressive square. They both continue developing, and Alireza plays c6 to stop the white knight from jumping into the position. Now Magnus castles, and they trade some pawns. Pawns get pushed. White develops his queen, and his opponent centralizes the rook. Alireza is also doing something interesting here with his a-pawn. He keeps pushing it further and further down the board, trying to gain space on the queen side. Bro really likes this pawn. At this point, this pawn has basically become a main character. But Magnus doesn't panic about the advanced pawn. Instead, he continues repositioning his knight. Then black takes b2, and Magnus retakes with the bishop, bringing him onto a strong diagonal. Alireza is bringing his bishop out to e6. But this is actually the first big mistake of the game. Alireza had a much better option. He could either offer a bishop trade or simply pull his bishop back. The problem with the bishop move is that Magnus can immediately take it, and after the exchange, white gets a very comfortable position with a clear advantage. After Magnus takes the bishop with the knight and black retakes, Magnus repositions his knight. They shuffle some pieces, and Magnus gets ready to push his a-pawn. Black gets ready to double up the rooks, and Magnus brings in his other rook. The black rooks get doubled, and white opens up his rook, getting ready to push the pawn. Alireza brings back his rook, and Magnus pushes the pawn. Then black pulls back his knight, and white moves his queen forward. The other black knight gets repositioned, and white trades knight for bishop. This trade is very important. Magnus is giving up his knight for the bishop because the position is becoming more and more open. In an open position with pawns on both sides of the board, the bishop can attack from a distance and use both diagonals, while Alireza's knights struggle to find good squares. So Magnus is not just trading pieces randomly, he is deliberately heading towards an endgame that favors his bishop pair. Magnus is winning by 2.6. This is getting ugly. Now he does something insanely tricky. Everything in his position says he's going to commit to an attack on the left side of the board, but he moves his rook to the center of the board. And this is where Magnus's plan becomes really interesting. He has spent a lot of time making it look like the queen side is where he wants to attack. His a-pawn is advanced, his rooks are active there, and black has committed pieces to that side. But Magnus doesn't actually have to attack there. He has already achieved something much more important. He has forced Alireza's pieces into passive positions. This is a really powerful strategic idea. You don't always have to attack the side where your pieces are positioned. Sometimes the threat of an attack is enough to force your opponent's pieces into bad squares. Once they're committed there, you can switch the attack somewhere else. Now he can switch the attack to the center. Alireza pulls his knight to the left side of the board. He still believes Magnus will push on that side. After Magnus pushed a pawn, the black knight goes to the edge of the board. This knight is basically on vacation. White pushes the pawn again, attacking the knight. The black knight retreats, and Magnus pushes f4, building a strong pawn structure. Instead of rushing into an attack, he is slowly taking more and more space. But space isn't just about having your pawns further forward. Every pawn move also takes squares away from your opponent's pieces. That's why black's knights are becoming more and more uncomfortable. Their possible squares are slowly disappearing, and once these pawns start moving forward, black's pieces have fewer and fewer squares to work with. Alireza attacks the white queen, but Magnus doesn't move it. Instead, he pushes the f-pawn again, offering a queen trade. Black is losing, so Alireza doesn't want to trade. Magnus moves his queen onto d7, looking for a trade again. The black queen goes to g5, and Magnus offers a pawn trade. Black takes, and white retakes. This white pawn is now 2 squares away from promoting. Alireza checks, and the white king goes into the corner. Black pushes b6, opening an attack on the white queen, and now I'll give you 10 seconds to look at this position. I bet you won't be able to figure out what Magnus played. Before you see the move, think about everything that's happening here. Magnus's queen is under pressure, the black pieces are ready to break the queen side, and his pawn is dangerously close to promotion. It looks like Magnus might have to react to black's threats, but Magnus has calculated something much deeper. Magnus takes the pawn, and now the best move for black is to take the queen, but black instead moves his knight to d3 to break the protection of the rook to the queen. Magnus takes the knight, and black retakes. Now Magnus can't take the queen because that would give black the option to get a huge advantage by taking the rook, which would result in winning both bishops of white. Instead, Magnus takes the rook with the pawn. He is now 1 square away from promoting. And this is the key idea behind Magnus's entire combination. Magnus has 2 pawns, which are very close to promoting, and he knows that when he gets one on the 8th rank, he will win the game. Black takes the bishop on c3, and Magnus takes the pawn on c6. Now black has to take the pawn to not lose the knight, because if black doesn't take the pawn, white can play this sequence to pin the knight. After Alireza takes, Magnus retakes. Then black takes the pawn on c4. Magnus pins the knight, and black builds an escape for his king. Magnus checks, and the black king runs. Magnus pushes again. Alireza pins the pawn to the rook. The rook on e8 can't leave because the black queen would take the pawn. But Magnus finds a brilliant move by sacrificing the rook. If black takes, Magnus can promote his pawn, and black is forced to trade the queens. So black runs again, and white promotes to a queen. Black takes the rook and checks the king. Alireza starts a huge sequence of checks against the white king. But Magnus maneuvers his king perfectly, and after this block, black has no more checks. It's mate in 4, and black resigns. Yeah, it's that simple. Learn this opening and start gaining elo rapidly, but you don't actually get better just because you learned a new opening. You get better because you have a good training structure. My next video will be about a 1-hour daily training structure, and this girl following it has already gained just over 500 elo in just 1 week, and you can do it too. I'll show you how next week. So subscribe and watch this video next.